on
in England.
no, but in Europe, and I don't think I say I've done it enough times to say I ski, but I have skied.
I skied. Yeah, that implies something much different than I ski. I've skied. I've played tennis.
Yeah, not very well, but I've done it. I fell down a mountain in a slightly, in a way that didn't kill me,
Like a controlled fall.
Controlled fall.
Well, welcome everybody to today's Solid Ground live stream. We are delighted to be here with Neil joining us to have a discussion today. And David, you want to start us off with an intro to Solid Ground?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. So Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice, CSJ, aka woke, and or COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies, and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 per month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Excellent. Well, it's so nice to see all of you today. And it's
likewise,
Neil. Yeah. And so Neil mentioned to me some study that he's been doing in marketing recently and some ideas that really were applicable to the situation that we've been discussing and the topics that we've been discussing. And so we thought it would be great to have him join us and to broaden this discussion. And so Neil, would you want to kind of give an intro to what these ideas were, an overview of what we were talking about?
Yeah, sure. So I've been studying marketing for a consultancy that I'm building, and I need to know a little bit more. And what I was surprised to discover was how much behavioral psychology is central to good marketing. And in particular, the concept of trying to change people's behavior. You might think of that in terms of wanting to get somebody to buy something, but also politics is essentially marketed. You want people to change the way they vote or act in certain situation. And so the basic things that came out that really sort of come to the surface, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is very applicable to this type of discussion, were world narrative or worldview. What's your worldview? What's your internal narrative, which can best be understood as people like us do things like this? And then status. How do you see yourself in the world in terms of status, and particularly relative to others? So as I started to look at these three areas, I realized that what you've just spoke of as woke or critical social justice is extremely well marketed. And it had never occurred to me that that was the case. I was always confused personally about why people took on ideas which I look at and rationally challenge. I was like, why do people take on these ideas? And then as I've started to study marketing, I've realized that a lot of our decision making isn't rational decision making. It's quite emotive, and it's quite a lot to do with how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive the world around us, and how we want to align those two perceptions. And from there, I feel like I understand this entire movement like so much more. And I've studied this stuff theoretically for a couple of years, but 3 months of marketing, and it was like something like a penny's dropped, and I'm seeing things very differently now. But rather than me just speak about it for like a half an hour or 40 minutes, if there's anything like that, even from what I've said already, that you want to know a little bit more about, we could start to explore it as a conversation.
When you said it was
looking at yeah.
I was going to say, when you said it's extremely well marketed, and what did you mean by that? What did you come across? What What was
Okay,
that?
so a couple of years back, one of my friends who works in animal welfare, it's kind of like peak BLM period. He contacted me and he said, "Oh, we really want to learn about the BLM method of like marketing because we want to apply it to animal welfare because they've managed to onboard so many people into their idea so quickly." And my response to that was critical race theory, blah, 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 postmodernism, blah, 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 blah. And I focused on theory and just ignored everything he'd said and until now. And now I realize, okay, so for example, the world narrative, that's the world view that all of this supports all of these ideas is that injustice is widespread and it's systemic. It's very simple. And I guess most of us will probably think injustice is widespread, but it's not systemic. So that's a different worldview. It's a very simple difference. Its systemic worldview is much easier to align to in terms of, well, you don't need to think through the complexities of the reality. And you can also remove any personal individual responsibility, even to the extent of saying, oh, let's say, for example, white privilege or that racism is some systemic white inherited system. Well, if you did feel in any way that you might be a racist white person, it's so much easier to say, well, that's because of the system. It's not me, the individual. So, it's quite easy to align to when you're not certain about things, and it's a very simplistic worldview. So you've got these two different competing worldviews. I think most people acknowledge that injustice exists, and it is quite widespread, or there's differences, but one is a very complex view that there's many things at play, including the individual, collection, system, history, culture. The other view is very simple. The simple view is much more easy to market, by the way. It's the system, break the system. Oh, okay. So that's one example. If we look at the internal narrative that we all hold in some way, people like us do things like this. So let's say people like us who want to make the world a better place, that want to solve injustice in the world, do things like anti-racism, pro-trans rights, anti-fascism, maybe even anti-capitalism. So it's quite easy to pitch towards the people like us, people with good intention, to then give them a toolbox in which they can act upon that good intention, which fits nicely into their worldview, that they're not the problem, the system is the problem, they're not personally responsible, it's an external responsibility, but because they're the good-hearted people that want to see the change in the world, here's the toolbox that allows you to deliver on that, none of which requires a great deal of self-education. You don't really need to have to study postmodern philosophy or socioeconomics over intergenerational trauma or any of these more deeper topics, which are probably more informative. And then the last part of it is just about status, is how we perceive our own status in the world and in relation to others. And I think this one's very interesting. There's basically, most people's status in the world goes down two opposing channels. It's either domination, so people that want to win, and their status gets elevated through winning, and affiliation, which is people that wish to belong to the right group. So some people just want to be on the winning team, and other people just want to be with the right people. And that's a very simplistic view, but you can get into it into more detail, but status tends to go down one of these two channels. So if we look at people that want to affiliate, they want to be part of the right thing, they want to be on the right side of history, for example, and they may want to do that by raising their own status, looking good in front of others, by joining the right group and raising the status of other people. So a very simple way of looking at it would be like the heroic type of character. Superman is the perfect example. He could have dominated the world, but he chose to help the world. So he was raising his own status by raising the status of others. That's what philanthropists do, largely, those that declare their philanthropy anyway, that don't keep it hidden. But it's also what social justice warriors do, so to speak. They make themselves look good in the world by raising the status of others, along the lines of people like us do things like this within a narrative of, or a worldview of, the problem is systemic, we just need to change the system. So you can start to play this out in a little bit more detail. You can go, but as I started to see things like that, I saw how easy it was to pitch to people, get on board with this idea. You can associate with the right side of history. You can act out your good intention of changing the world to make it a better place by getting rid of inequality. And it's embedded in this quite easy narrative that the world is historically or systemically problematic. And therefore, all that we need to do is get together collectively and change the system, and then the world can be a better place. And
you're basically tapping into an underlying value system that is shared. So a shared sense of cultural or social values. And then you're offering a set of simplistic like heuristics and rituals that can be performed that will simultaneously satisfy this value system in this simplistic way, while also conferring status gains on the person who accepts this. So that's really interesting. Am I summing that up?
Very well, much better than I could. So yeah, absolutely.
No, that's really interesting. I think that's a great observation.
So Neil, do you think that, I mean, when your friend approached you and said, yeah, we want to know more about how BLM does their marketing, like, are we accurate to imagine that somebody somewhere actually sat down and thought, okay, how can let's strategize. And they were actively knew that they were using common behavior analysis, like to try to like actively market this. I mean, I just think about BLM and it's like Black Lives Matter, even just that statement, that slogan, like that was obviously brilliant, right? That captures a lot right there, that statement. Who's going to argue against that? And who's not going to get on board with that, right? But I mean, the larger part of it, like the creation of this whole thing, do you think there was somebody in a room somewhere with 3 other people brainstorming, okay, or did it just like kind of evolve? That's what I'm wondering. Like, I'm thinking about the evil people in a room somewhere. Like in my mind, it's like, how can we make a shit ton of money? Like how can we make money? Like, not so much like how can we dominate the world, but how can we make money off of this like white liberal, the group that they're marketing to, right? White liberal, guilty, middle class, those people. How can we sell this?
So there's a couple of ways to look at that. I mean, one is that all of the theory behind the Black Lives Matter movement, if to talk of that specifically, so critical race theory, intersectionality, and postmodernism, that's got an enormous long history.
Yeah.
That has a strategy, which is get inside academia first. Inside academia, you can then create people that become advisors or operatives in a broader sense, whether that's marketing, politics, business, HR, education. So that's a strategic pathway. And a strategic pathway has a long-term vision of change. And that's basically what strategy is a long-term vision of how a change can be implemented. And marketing is extremely strategic in that sense. So I would say that it would be there would be a marketing mindset inherent in any long-term strategy of change that you're trying to deliver. To the point where I think, to try to get closer to, was there ever a point where a cabal of people sat down and decided, right, this is how we'll deliver it, and this is how we'll, make green off the back of it, so to speak. When I think about some of the iconography used in BLM and how very quickly the thing to do was to change your Facebook profile picture or Twitter avatar to, I think, was it a black flag? I can't remember.
Oh, or the fist, or
the fist, yeah, maybe,
like
yeah.
banner thing.
Yeah, and now it's either a Ukraine flag or it's a pride flag, or but that marketing tool, find a logo that clearly represents a movement, and affiliate by showing it, and denigrate anyone that doesn't. And that's a marketing tool right there. That's a tactic, actually, but it's a very, very effective tactic. And the fact that something like that even appeared, I don't know whether that would be organic or whether that was considered, but the overall effectiveness of picking a title for a movement, which, just as, like you say, Black Lives Matter, who couldn't get on board with that? Okay. So as a sentence, to refute that would be, socially suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
When you dig into it as a movement, there's something else there that's not just about Black lives being important and mattering. Right? The fact that any attempt to make all lives matter a valuable statement got crushed very, very quickly. And that to me also feels very strategic. If I was trying to sell my story, I don't want a competing story that looks really similar. So in a marketing perspective, I would go out and sabotage it too.
That's really interesting.
So I'll play that devil's advocate. I'll be the cabal of one in the room here and say, yeah, I would imagine that it was sat down and very carefully considered about how to really propagate a message very quickly, to consider what reasons people might reject it from the basis of worldview. People like us do things like this, and the conference of status. And I think from those perspectives, you'd easily come up with what we saw happen in that one particular area of social justice. But you can look very into trans rights as well, and it's quite similar.
Right. So it's very opportunistic in a way. It was like an opportunity on the back of the thing that had already been happening. Interesting to me is when you said this is what people like us do. And then with the Facebook stuff, and then, this is, and we're going to show who we are. We're going to have these banners, or we're going to put the pride flag or whatever, and then denigrate. The flip side is that, and you guys out there, the us, them stuff are the people who don't, you're not on board, and the denigration. So that it's almost like, it's not just like human behavior. It's like, well, I guess this counts as human behavior. This like something very primal, this in-group, out-group stuff. Like, this is our tribe. This is our herd. And that's the herd over there. And not just like live and let live, but we're going to try to destroy you unless you try to be in our herd. Almost as if like, it's like, try in order to validate our own being in this herd, or I don't know, there's something very, very destructive at the heart of it, and in-group, out-group stuff that it capitalizes on our natural, or think, and like almost animal instinct to like, this is our species here, and we're staying in this, and we're going to denigrate and try to destroy anyone who's not in our group.
What you're saying there, Jody, that's what that strikes me as like, it's such a cheap, like, social gain that is made by adhering to these philosophies or to these marketing strategies or whatever you want to call it, because that's the social gain. You'd get it by putting other people down. You don't have to really do any other thing except demonstrate allegiance and then denigrate the opposition or anybody who even just wants to come in with a clarifying broadening of perspective. It's not even about, it's just, if you're not going to adhere rigidly, we're going to cancel you or shout you down. And so that's the social gain. It's that process of let's circle the wagons and point the finger. And so it's a really cheap gain.
And it has to be public, right? You have to it has to be very, very public, because you have to show everybody I'm destroying this other person's life. Therefore, look at how good I am.
Yeah.
Right. It gets
right. And look at what will happen to you if you contradict or criticize our messaging in any ways. I tend to think it was quite a coordinated strategic effort, because one of the founders, Patrice, I don't know how to say her last name, Colors, I think, had said in an interview, we are literally trained Marxists. So I think there was quite a bit of thought to how they marketed. themselves, and they capitalized so quickly upon the death of George Floyd. I mean, for that to have been so successful and for the troops to have been rallied so quickly, they really have to have been lying in wait, just waiting for the next event to happen that they could use, they could co-opt into sort of proving their point and furthering what they want to do.
Is it also though that like it was not just their ideas, it was the fact that corporate America, corporations in the Western world took this up as a kind of an easy kind of route to kind of show themselves since the crash in whenever it was 2008 to be good corporations who are doing right by the world. And I mean, even a Marxist I'd have a little bit more sympathy for, because at least they're looking at economic inequality, whereas this push to make it about race or gender or something, I felt like something that they could solve a bit easier by just maybe bringing on a few more black people into a board or something like that. It was almost like, I wonder if it's like a corporate engine going, actually, we don't have to think about economic inequality because that's a real tough problem. We've got a simple solution here, and we can just, put, maybe not even putting people on your board, you just need to put it on your Twitter page, probably.
Yeah, why wouldn't they jump in on it, right?
But it's a good marketing campaign.
Yeah.
That's your point, isn't it?
Good marketing campaign, sell things. Okay, we can sell products to this entire group of people. Once that group of people got large enough to be an economic body worth engaging with, then all you have to do is say, your worldview is our worldview. People like you buy things from people like us.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a really good point. I'm Neil, I'm also fresh from a day spent talking about power, privilege, and diversity. So I can't tell you how much it's music to my ears. It's literally like a wash of a feeling of, okay, this is calming me down a little bit just to hear you talking, because there's been such a muddle during this day, and people have been stuck, and things were said and nobody knows why. Nobody knows why we're stuck. Nobody wants to say anything. People are fearful. The people who are facilitating the day, those that wanted to put it in place, have kind of, they abdicated responsibility and they said, we don't really know what we should do. What should we do better? And it's just, there's all this mess. And I like the fact that you're cutting through the noise a bit here and talking a bit about why these ideas spread in the first place. What was it about the stickiness of them? They're almost like a Richard Dawkins would talk about it as a meme, wouldn't he? But you're talking about it even in terms we understand even more, because it's literally about marketing.
So one thing that sort of stood out for me as you guys were talking was as Jodie, you were saying about us, if there's an us, there's a them. And yeah. I've noticed something over the past few years, which probably already existed, but I hadn't paid attention to, is how if you were to say, I've got some reservations around critical social justice, then you'd probably be labeled a Trump supporter if you was an American, or a conservative if you were British, a Tory, probably an anti-vaxxer, probably this, probably that. And very quickly, it's like there's only one worldview that exists, or there's two, our one and your one, and any other more nuanced perspective is treated with really high levels of suspicion. Not amongst everybody, but I'd say the large majority of people just fall into these two categories of us and them. And then there's a very small number of people that are actually can detach themselves far enough and step back far enough to question the validity in ideas across the spectrum. The radical center, Leslie, you've placed yourself away from both groups and with an openness to value and lack of value in both directions. But what I think is target audience for this marketing campaign were people that saw themselves as being on the left of politics, generally speaking. And that's a very big, broad category of people. And within that category, there are people that respond to status quite differently. And I thought this was very interesting. The idea within marketing is that people tend to maintain their status. Very few people want to shift it too far. Some people might want to maintain a high status or try to shift it up a bit. And that would be kind of like your social justice warrior, or the type of person who just wants to win everything by crushing the opposition. So that's the dominant type versus the affiliative. The affiliative type is the superhero type. And then, but there's also people that want to lower their status. And I couldn't understand this at first, but it's about being safe. People with a low status are far less of a target in the world, because they seem or appear less effective. So they tend to be more ignored. And a very gentle example of someone that maintains their low status by helping others is the type of person that opens the door for people, the type of person that lets someone go in front of them in a queue. And I was thinking, how does this apply? How does this play out within critical social justice? And I started to think about people that unpack their privilege or literally lower their status as a human being in favor of other human beings. So if you're that type of person, if you feel that the way that you survive in the world is by going below the radar and not being a target and not being too much of a trouble for anybody else or a changer of anything, there's a marketing campaign for you too. Declare your privilege, unpack it, silence yourself so that others can speak. And then, but if you're the dominant type that wants to crush and win everything, then you can just go out there and tell everybody how terrible they are and how great you are and how you're the one to change it all. And then there's a final category of people, those that lower their own status through denigration of others, which is, to me, is a very bizarre group of people, but it does exist. People that are very angry, very narcissistic, very toxic in how they express themselves. And I was thinking, does this group of people have a place within this whole, within sort of like the woke arena? And then I started to think of libs of TikTok and how many people go on there and just say the most horrid stuff about others and present themselves in the most terrible way. But it does seem to be that every aspect of status and how that might play out within these worldview, and with this internal narrative of people like us do things like this, has been accommodated in some way. And then when I try to look at it from a different perspective, which is what's being done in response to this whole movement, and it's not so cohesive. There's not such a coherent sort of message that stands. There's an anti-woke thing, and it tends to be reaction to. But I don't see a structured people like us, different us, because we have a different worldview, do things like this that you can become part of, which would incorporate things such as, let's say we recognize injustice in the world, but see it as more complex. So people like us think more carefully about how we resolve issues, seek to include everybody's opinion, but try to test that against the truth or test that against reality. And so that's just a slight shift, but I don't see it in a very sort of concrete manner. It certainly doesn't have logos or movements with names, and it's just generally seen as anti something that already exists. And being anti is a negative framing. So.
Well, that's the problem, right? I was just, as you were talking about the us, them stuff, I was thinking the us, the strong and loud existence of the us, BLM probably also solidifies a them, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you're kind of like, I see like problems with that and with that, then you're kind of like, you have the politically homeless trope, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and it's hard to, when things feel so like it's such an existential threat, maybe it's a status thing, but you feel like, God, I have to like pick a side here because I have to go into the them, which is made more strident in opposition to the us. And that's also an easy, it captures all, it seems like to hit all the same check boxes, but just in the opposite direction in some ways, right?
That's the thing, Jody. I was thinking about, it's like forced teaming.
Yes,
So
because otherwise there is no team, because it isn't easily done by a logo or it's not quick. Like, and it is nuanced and complex, and you are going to have disagreements, and it's like you can't just get on board with this simple formula, which is either for or against.
that's what I think of the anti-woke, right? What is it? It's not a thing. It's not some coherent thing. It's not a movement. It's rational people from all different walks of life using their critical thinking skills to say, I don't think this makes that much sense. And so it's not a group. It's not a people like us, because it's people. I guess that's a first thought. So I would love to hear something that contradicts that if you have thoughts. But I also wanted to ask you, Neil, when you're talking about two different categories, I wanted to see if you could expound on the contrast there between the type that are gaining status through denigration of others or through putting other people in their place, versus the toxic, narcissistic class that you mentioned at the end, that are just kind of lowering their own status by putting other people down. Would you mind talking a little more about that?
Okay, so the idea is that so we have people that associate their status for affiliation, and we would see them probably more positively, generally speaking. So I'm going to make myself look better by raising you, or I'm going to fly below the radar and keep myself out of it by raising you. So they're more easy to understand, I think, generally speaking. So the other side is maybe a smaller group, but people that understand their own status through domination. So you've got the very competitive, maybe people that go into like athletics or into politics that seek to win at all cost, and are quite happy to make you look bad to make them look good. I think those we can understand quite well as well. Sometimes that's a very positive attribute if you desperately need to win something, but it can also, it tends to be quite an aggressive position. The group that is unusual is those that want to stay below the radar. They don't want to be put into the limelight. So they don't want to necessarily win, but what they do want to do is they don't want to affiliate with anybody either. It's hard for me to describe, but essentially they maintain their low status by causing pain to others. And they're creating a space where they will be rejected. And they feel safer in that rejected space because there's nothing expected from them. And it feels like a tragedy just to describe any human being that feels the need to position their life in that way. And it sounds like people that have trauma. But there are many people that will continually maintain their low status, and they might even leverage that as victimhood, for example. So victimhood is probably quite a good descriptor because it requires an oppressor. So I don't want to be responsible for leading a group of people. I don't want a high status. I don't want people leaning on me and expecting me to achieve great things. I feel much safer where nobody really wants to look at me and no one wants anything to do with me, where I'm invisible and out the way. At the same time, I don't really want to affiliate with a group to achieve that. I don't even know how to go about doing that. Maybe I have to be nice to everyone and put myself down, and I don't have the energy for that either. So possibly the easiest escape route in that situation is to be the angry victim and say it's everybody else's fault. You're all terrible people. Look what you've done to me. That's why none of you want to come near me. Don't come near me. It's kind of a toxic internal place for a human being to be in. But that victim narrative is actually sold in critical social justice as being a very valid position. And we probably see that more in the realm of therapy than other areas, where people desperately hang on to their victim status as an identity. And it alleviates you the responsibility of doing anything about it because you say it's somebody else's fault. So it plays into that troubled side of many people. And I think that might actually, now I'm thinking about this for the first time, I wonder if that's where, particularly within social media, that development of the victim narrative and victim status as being something that people want to own has come from. And that probably feeds into the sort of social contagion of trans movement to some degree as well. Because if you declare yourself trans as a child, as a younger person, let's say, that puts you into a very small category of people that are automatically victimized and therefore need to seek lots of attention, but don't have to do anything in return. You don't have to give anything
It's also, somebody mentioned this to me, a little off, but it's also a way, if you're white and you're being taught you're an oppressor,
Mhm.
if you become trans, now you're being oppressed. Like it's a way to get out of that stat if you don't want to do if you don't want to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, if you stack your intersectional score well enough, then you actually gain power from that. And that's often just a matter of declaring appropriate identities which score better on the oppressed side than the oppressor side. You can offset your whiteness by becoming trans.
Yeah.
If it were a game, and there were a scoreboard, that's how you'd play to win.
This us them sorry, you guys just tell me if I'm dominating the conversation. Us them thing has been plaguing me for quite a while because I mean people have tried to organize a movement around being reasonable and nuanced, and it just doesn't seem to take. It's not, I think that I don't know, it is dangerous to not at least name the problem. Like critical social justice is a big problem. And I think, well, I guess now we're getting into the nuance. Like some people would pick critical social justice apart and say, well, this part's not a problem, but this part's a problem. Whereas like some people are like, no, the whole thing is a problem. And some people are like, it should never even be taught. And other people are like, oh, but it's just a theory. You can teach it along with other theories. It's a theory isn't the problem. The problem is when it's implemented. You know, there's all these different arguments about how to argue against CSJ. So I guess as I'm speaking, I'm naming the problem of why it's so hard to have a more nuanced, because everybody's kind of all over the place.
Well, it's because you almost have to become a reactionary cult, like a counter cult, if you're going to really organize. And I think
that's effective. Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to use the same strategy, I think that's why this sort of pushback defies the formula a little bit. Like there's a lot of talk about what are we for? Let's stop talking about what we're against, but what is we? What is we? And how do we make a we out of this? Because then you fall into narrative, counter narrative, and that is just that same process of polarization. And I think that staying sort of grounded and open is in itself a value. I'm going to start rambling. So somebody else.
I was just thinking you can't just put things on placards to sort of say, you know, we don't have a defined enemy in a weird way, because we want to speak to people about the fact that their ideas about injustice are, you know, we commend them on their zeal to want to go after this stuff, but we just think that there are other things to talk about. But to sort of say on a placard, you know, what do we want? Change. When do we want it? Iteratively and after a thorough discussion. Doesn't quite work, does
it? Very hard to market, David.
Maybe you can help with that, Neil. Yeah.
David, I'll buy that shirt.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, and then we have with the marketing, now we have like with social media and viral stuff, and then George Floyd, virality. Isn't that also a sexual term? Virality. The virality, STDs, anyone? The BLM, STD, 3-letter acronyms. Isn't there, I mean, I was just going to say, like, combining this brilliant marketing with social media, I mean, that it's just like, it's like a lit match in a pond of gasoline, just instant.
Well, yeah, for a lot of reasons, right? Because social media already is training people to have short attention spans and use a lot of shortcuts to coming to decisions and making assumptions. So there's that. Plus,
And
like
in group out group stuff.
Yeah. And the glossy, slick, repetitive programming.
It's like kind of goes hand in hand with all this stuff, I think. It's like perfect storm.
Neil, you've got to help us out of this. We've got to market our ideas better somehow. We've got to somehow. I mean, I know Jordan Peterson talks about, like, he thinks the things that go to really capture people's attention is to talk about responsibility over rights. He talks about that's maybe where we can capture people's imagination. I don't know where to go with that, but I think he's got a point.
Well, what about I think there's something we're not thinking. Oh, sorry. I have to say this though. So I'm dominating again. I'm so dominant. There's something about maybe we're thinking about this the wrong way. Because think about the power, because I was just thinking about individualism, right? That's incredibly important. And if we're like, no, individualism, and like, no, collectivism, individualism, it's like, well, then that all falls apart, because as a collective, you have all this power, but as individuals, we have the same problem. But think about what individualism spawns, which is art, music. Think about the power of, what's his name? The guy that makes the rap videos, anti-woke, those rap videos. He's huge. The white guy.
Yeah.
McDonald.
Is it McDonald? Yeah.
McDonald. Tom McDonald, I think.
Yeah.
Like the most unwrapped name you could think of, like super white name, like, and he makes a video. It's like got 4 million hits on YouTube. I mean, that the power. So you have all these different kinds of people from all walks of life. I mean, I was listening to it, middle-aged white lady, right? Like, all like can gravitate towards something. It's a really catchy. It's got good lyrics. Like, it makes you feel. If you can evoke the emotive stuff, Neil, you're talking about, like making decisions based on emotions, like, then, and you can do that with a song. It doesn't have to be like a logo or a movement. It could literally be a piece of art. So that's one way you can get movement going. I think.
Yeah.
Hope.
I think that's really great. And I also think that taps into another thing that is maybe a shared, I've talked about this before, but I think it's a shared value culturally across cultures, is courage. And one thing that we lack when we're falling into groupthink is courage. We're sliding into the easy go along to get along kind of mindset. And you've got a lot of people who, fit into the categories that you described, Neil, who are buying the marketing and who are going to put that outfit on and wear it. But then there's a lot of people also who are hovering around the edges, who are allowing it to go, allowing this to propagate and kind of saying the phrases, but aren't really feeling it. And what they need to tap into is a sense of courage. And if we can, I think that is one thing that I don't know how to market that really, but if we can talk about that, and that people are so afraid to look stupid. People are so afraid to be the fool. And if you're in a group of people and they're all saying, well, the sky is green, and you're going, it's blue, like if you're in the Ash conformity experiment, you're afraid to be the guy who calls the line the length that you really think it is, because you're going to look stupid and everybody's going to look at you and go, what's wrong with you? And you're doubting yourself. And I think that tapping back into that self-assurance and that courage to, and maybe, I don't know, how do you talk about that in a slick marketing kind of way? Be the guy who beats the Ash test. I don't know. Don't be the guy who zaps everybody in Milgram's test. I don't know,
But there's something interesting there, because when any successful marketing campaign initially isn't aimed at everybody. Okay, let's just say, for example, you have a target group of people who you want to change their behavior in some way. So you define who they are. Let's just say we want to influence the people that want to make the world a better place by doing positive things for others. We'll aim for that group of people. What change do we want to see in that group of people? We want to see them maybe use more courage or to be more courageous. Let's just say that for what you just said. Okay, so you don't then try to change 20 million people to become more courageous. So that's really, really difficult. What you aim to do is, within any group of people, there are a very small number that are kind of technically referred to as neophiliacs, people that love the new. You could also call them early adopters, or they're the person that bought Bitcoin before everybody else, or the person that tried paragliding when no one else was prepared to do it. There's always someone out there that wants to take the risk of doing something new, so they can tell other people that they took the risk of doing something new, and then they propagate the idea on your behalf. So what you would do is you'd look towards a group of people and say, like, here's a group of people that are actually really close to us, but there's some differences, and we kind of want to edge them over here a little bit more. So maybe back towards more traditional forms of liberalism, as an example. So already liberal, already left-minded, but I've got a little bit caught up in this narrative that it's systemic, and we want to shift it back towards this other narrative of individual courageousness. So within that group, you're just looking for a small number who are going to be the first ones to champion this idea. Now you're actually aiming to influence a small number of people in a very specific way. If you can formulate that clearly enough to yourself, then you can act upon it in a way that you can strategize and reach out. And honestly, academic theory and that sort of direction, I don't think is easy to sell. It's taken, like Marxism, the best part of 100 years to gain any traction, and that's too long. But music, like Jodie's pointed to, cultural artifacts. So music, art, sport, I don't know, something that people can quickly grasp emotionally.
Memes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have to grasp too much like it could be pet ownership, like it could be almost
Comedy.
anything.
Yeah, humor.
Comedy's brilliant.
Comedy's big.
Yeah, because it's courageous in itself already, and it dares to. So that's the way I would approach it. I'd be looking to, I wouldn't want to change everybody. I'd look at one specific group. Then I'm trying to narrow that down to a specific change, and then look for the types of people that would respond to that first, and how do you get a message to them? And then, when you've got one group to start to shift, you can then start to work on another group with a different marketing campaign. Council culture versus unpacking privilege versus pulling down the man. These are all very different ways of reaching different groups of people to try to affect the same type of change. So rather than the them and us, so from the perspective of not woke, it is a very, very diverse group of people that don't form an us, there's no clear us. There's people there who are there because they're actually hardcore conservative. There are people there because they're very liberal. There's people there because they really challenge these ideas. And there's people there who are actually just out and out racist, homophobic people that just like, no, like we stand against this inherently. They don't even form a group, right? You can't even get those people together, but you don't need to. Actually, all you really need to do is formulate a very clear strategy for changing one group of people to shift their behavior in a very slight way. And because that's all that's really happened. I think that's all that's really happened with this movement in the first place, is most of the people that seem to have got on board with critical social justice before they heard critical social justice would have been on board with civil rights. And it's not that far away. It's just a slightly different worldview, and then a really clear set of tools that you can affiliate and pick up and join where you can feel like a champion, where you can feel like you're making a change. Because classical liberalism is a bit of a slow cooker, and it takes time. You know, it's very effective, but it takes time. It's took a long time since the Enlightenment to now for things to change. Whereas this new movement offers what feels like revolutionary speed of change. We can change it right now because the target is really clear. It's the system. We can change the system. Get on board now. Don't miss out. You know, you want to buy into this now because you don't want to be late on this one. You know, like, it just feels now. The more I think about it, it just feels like a really good sales campaign. Like the whole thing. It was just like, shit. Have we just been pulled into? Yeah, into a really clever marketing campaign. All we need is another clever marketing campaign to shift them to that next stage. So the next stage in this revolution is including everybody again.
Mm-hmm.
Is to stop the counselling and bring everybody on board. That's the next stage. You know, expand it further by including all the white people again and all the straight people again and everybody else again, and you back to where you were, but with a lot more energy. So maybe you just need to hire some good marketing people.
Looks like we got one.
Yeah, for a job, Neil. We don't pay much.
I'm 3 months into learning about marketing. Like 3 months ago, I didn't know anything about marketing. I decided I would teach myself. My goal was by the end of this year that I'd be really good at strategic marketing. So every book I've bought since November has been about marketing.
But so this is just kind of random. You're like, oh, I want to learn more about marketing, or I think you said at the beginning you wanted it's for a purpose, right?
Yeah. So as you know, I was training to be a psychotherapist, and I stepped out of that training because of this particular woke movement. And I've got a friend who's a psychotherapist too. He's been for about 25 years that I also met through CTA. And he kind of wants to get out of psychotherapy too. But we both really still want to use what we know about people and personal development and growth and relational growth to help people fulfill their life. But we're going to do that in a very specific way. We want to look at people that build tech and business to business services that are looking to make change in the world and help them overcome anxiety and deal with challenge and deal with chaos and crisis, because we're entering a decade of poor economy, massive social change and massive technological change, and it's going to be really scary. I believe for the next decade the world's going to be quite a volatile place, and to be successful in that space is hard, but there are ways that you can do that, and a large part of that is being able to see opportunity in chaos, and learn to develop a mindset that responds to change by going ground towards ground and finding center, rather than being shaken by the difficulties of the world. So we're setting up, we were going to call it consultancy, but we're going to set it up slightly differently. It's more like collaboration as a service. We're going to set up this different format of working with people where we can bring young entrepreneurs, business founders, people from different ages, different backgrounds together to help each other to find stability, to lose anxiety, to get connection, to find a sense of belonging, and to build the businesses that they want to put into the world. And we think that would be really, really good thing to do. And my business partner in this, he's like the most introverted person I know. And he says, well, one of us has to do marketing and it's not going to be me, Neil. He says, you're going to have to do it. He says, otherwise this isn't getting off the ground. End of story. And I said, okay, like I'll do it. He said, great. What do you know about marketing? I said, nothing. I'll go learn. So that's where it started.
Okay.
And I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. I think it's such a fascinating topic. And I plan to be good at it by the end of next year, or the end of this year. That's my goal.
Great for you. Very applicable. I mean, I can see the crossover, like in your interest in the field of like psychology, how it's, I mean, particularly this topic, all marketing is human behavior. I mean, you have to know human behavior if you want to be effective, right?
Yeah,
You want to know how to trick people. Buying something.
absolutely. Yeah, that's it.
I took a consumer
I
psychology
need to win
course
their
in
money. So,
college. It was great. Before we wrap up, I want to read a couple of chats and then we have to go so Jennifer can get to her group. So let's
Thanks, Neil.
pleasure.
CNY Photo Video says hello. Flash White says hello. Patty P says getting crazy out here. Love you all. Mark Cavendish wishes us all a Valentine's Day. To this entire panel, be my Valentine. Thank you, Mark.
Oh,
There's me.
Dave Bourne says, yeah. The number one rule to not allow objectivity discourse was genius. It's referring back to the woke marketing. I think that's really true. Mike Wilson Art, they were allowed to capitalize by upper middle management of some of these large corporations.
Yeah.
Just reading, I'm just going to scan through, I'm not reading all of them. CNY Photo Video says, in order to be a good person, you must pay your medieval penance. That relates to the one group you were talking about there, Neil, one of the groups.
Yeah, like unpacking privilege. Yeah.
Chris R, never ever will the sane put up with censorship or marginalization of speech. I think that just refers to the diversity of people who are objecting to woke. It's putting them into the category of the sane.
Dane.
At its core, Jay Bourne says, is individualism versus collectivism. And yeah, so here I'm just going to scan down. Oceana 23, 95% of the public doesn't know that critical theory and critical thinking are two different things. We're screwed. I hope we're not screwed, but I kind of agree with the first part. And some folks offered up Tom McDonald when we were trying to catch his name. So yeah, that's it. Yep. Oceana 23 says Peter Boghossian calls it parrhesia, the Greek phrase for courage. Have you heard that?
Yeah,
parrhesia.
That's interesting. And yeah, so I will. Oh, how do we find Jennifer's group? Hughes Slalom says, how do we find Jennifer's group? So Jennifer, you want to, or Jody?
Yeah, you go to locals, right? And there's a link on our local.
So there's an explanation on solidgroundsupport.com of how to do it. Basically, our platform is on locals, and you need to become a subscriber to our locals community. It's $5 a month. And then you have access to any/all of the meetings, including Jen's. So the only people who pay get access to the links. And we think $5 a month is very reasonable, and it helps keep the groups a little bit safer from outside influences. And I will say we have not, at least in my group, and I think all of your groups, like we've not had any infiltrators to speak of that we know of. So that's good. Yeah. If you want the locals, am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, no trolls yet.
Yeah, no trolls yet. So the Solid Ground locals it's Jody Shaw. I couldn't change the URL. So it's jodyshaw.locals.com. But again, you can go through solidgroundsupport.com and just click on, I think it says get support, and it'll walk you through what to do. It's $5. So if you go there right now and join locals for $5, then you will have access to the locked posts, and you will be able to come to the Jen's group today.
And we have 4 groups a week. So you can join just one. If it suits you, you can join as many as you want. If you're part of the group, you're part of the team, you can come to
all of them.
Thank you guys for a great conversation today. And Neil, I'm so glad you could join us. I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. These ideas, I'm just kind of spouting as they come up with them. So it's really nice to have dialogue with people to make more sense out of it. But yeah, I'd love to come along and talk about anything that's useful to chat about. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us, Neil.
Lovely to see you, Jen. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. It's been awesome. Cheers.
All right.
Nice to meet you, Dave. Yeah. Okay.